This meeting is being recorded.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining Movo Academy. I've got Ben Woodman from Aviva today to talk you everything cargo, transit, you name it. Ben's quite happy to take questions throughout the presentation. So if you've got any questions, either use the chat facility or just unmute yourself or raise your hand or whatever, and we'll be more than happy to answer them. Ben, over to you.
Yeah, right. Shall I share my screen? We hope technology plays its part as it was earlier when we were testing it. So I'm going to ask whether or not that has come through okay.
Yeah, just taking a minute to load, but I'll confirm.
Saying it's sharing my side.
Yeah, it just took a little bit longer. It's the size of your, yeah.
Yeah, it's a bit of a beast. Is that all okay now?
Yeah, it is. Whether or not you want to get the sidebar off. It's got the sidebar showing.
Yeah, it should come through in a second. I've just hit go again. All working now?
No, not yet. We can see it. Oh no,
yeah.
It's all right.
Let me try another window. How about that one?
That's good.
There you go, brilliant. Okay, so yeah, good morning everyone. Thank you so much for the introduction, Julie. As Julie said, I'd like to make these as interactive as possible. So if you've got any questions, do feel free to just stick them into the chat box. My kind assistant Julie is going to monitor that throughout the presentation. But yeah, if you've got a question, often that means other people are sat there thinking the same thing. So yeah, please shout out and ask. So today we're going to be talking about that witchcraft and wizardry, that weird and wonderful thing called cargo insurance. And I'm hoping today I'll demystify it a little bit and show you that actually it's nothing too bad. It's just stuff in a box being shipped around the world. So yeah, with my aims and objectives today is to firstly try and show you the difference between UK transit cover, which is often under a commercial combined, and just give the real simple solution and as to why cargo is needed to upgrade that cover, how it works with that commercial combined, because we're going to start talking about potential things like stock throughputs. But most importantly, what I really want to give you guys today is the understanding of the risk that many of your customers, I'm sure, will face in the logistics model of just getting stuff delivered in the UK, let alone then importing and exporting. So we're going to be talking about using third parties like hauliers to move their goods for them, and also the weird and wonderful of Incoterms, which is to do with international transportation and logistics and buying and selling globally. So we're going to be touching on those a little bit, okay? But before I do, I represent, of course, today Aviva, part of a key partnership of a panel of insurers to Movo, and we at Aviva have been doing marine insurance in form and in part for nearly 200 years. So I'm exceedingly proud to be, albeit a very small time frame amongst those 200 years, helping on that journey Aviva have had in marine. Of course, like many insurers, our footprint started in actually insuring vessels and ships themselves, and we do have some history that tells us we had some involvement in the likes of the Titanic. But you know, fast forward however many years that is, we now have a full team based across the UK of marine underwriters and claims. And it's, you know, this team is all we do. We live and breathe marine. Every time I turn on my laptop, every single day, all I'm doing is marine. So although we have other products that, of course, that Aviva offer, rest assured, you have got a full-blown marine team that will be servicing that. We're not kind of dabbling in PI, D&O, and then doing a bit of marine on the side. It's a full-blown marine team. And the beauty actually about the fact that Aviva offer so many different products is that we can wrap that customer in yellow. We can be that one-stop shop. and you can place that marine cargo alongside the commercial combined. And then if you're going to start fluttering around with stock throughputs, of course, you've then got the business interruption we can cover on the commercial combined, and it's all in one place, which we feel is a really important thing that we can offer. So what is marine insurance? We are obviously going to be focusing on cargo insurance today, but marine, like other lines of business, is quite vast. Traditionally, as I mentioned, Aviva's first involvement in marine, you do of course have marine insurance for vessels and ships, you know, Russian oligarch vessels to cargo vessels to all sorts, to just little pleasure crafts on the Norfolk Broads. You also have marine liabilities. So that again is vast. You've got liabilities in order to operate your ship, a bit like car insurance. You know, you need some insurance in case you have an accident and whack into someone else's ship. You need protection for your crew on board, but also within marine liability, you also have haulage liability. Nothing to do with the open seas. As pictured there, a lorry driver, you know, the likes of Eddie Stobart, they need protection for if their goods that they're carrying, that of course is not going to be theirs, it's going to be someone else's. They need that liability, not an indemnity policy. They need that liability policy for if they accidentally damage it or it gets lost in their possession. So it's even that. But today, as I say, we're going to be talking about cargo insurance. Within cargo insurance, you've got commercial combined coverage, such as UK goods in transit for just goods moving around the UK, importing, exporting, stock throughputs. That's where we can add on some stock and cover that full logistic model of it moving, stopping, moving again. And then also the real sexy stuff, typically done out of Lloyd's of London, you get project cargo. So this is your lorry on the M25 with the flashing orange lights with support vehicles and a massive big generator on it, or it could be a piece of bridge or something like that. So as the name suggests, it's a key bit of infrastructure for a project, and as well as the actual typical cargo cover for it being moved around, we can bolt on some delay in startup cover as well. So that is essentially a bit like a business interruption. It's a ring-fenced value that if as a result of the damage in that transit, the project gets delayed, they get a bit of a check to help with that delay. Okay. But we're not talking about that today. We're going to talk about the stuff that we pass in your desk, typical cargo cover. So I'll start then by giving a bit of a one-liner, I guess, as to exactly what it's all about. And I actually cannot give a better description than what is printed there. And that is that cargo insurance covers customers for their goods whilst in transit. Okay. And even though we call it marine, actually, sea transit is just one element of the transits we cover. Predominantly, we're covering stuff on land, but we also cover stuff being air freighted, a very popular mode of transport to shift goods around the world. And of course, rail, not so popular in the UK, but very big over in Europe and the US. But we can include stuff in storage as well. But there's a very key difference between the two elements of cover we give for that. We give storage cover in what we call the ordinary course of transit. That's standard. You get that out the box. What we mean by the ordinary course of transit, if there was something was to leave Kent en route to Australia, it would be dumbfounded to think that those goods en route wouldn't need to temporarily pause. You know, even moving to between those different types of transport you've got on the screen there, it simply has to stop, has to be taken off of that mode of transport and put onto another one. So any temporary storage like that, or more commonly, it gets to the port, the vessel's late, has to go into a warehouse dockside for a bit. This is all covered because fundamentally that document says Kent to Australia. So anything in that journey, in that ordinary course of transit, that's the posh way we like to call it, that is covered, including that temporary storage. And what we would be looking for there, if, say, for example, there was a warehouse fire and there wasn't any specific storage on the policy, what we'd be looking for there is, when you get your parcels at home and there's that little clear plastic wallet and you open it up and it's got your invoice and your shipment documents on there, we're looking at the top left, the to, and the top right, the from. As I say, if it says Kent to Australia, but it happens to burn in a warehouse because it's temporarily been stored en route, that's absolutely covered, okay? But what we can do is we can create what's called a stock throughput. They've been around since about the 80s. And what this does is actually it looks at stripping the stock off of a traditional market, such as the commercial combined property market, and bolting it alongside the marine. And here, what we're talking about is either an owned or a third-party warehouse in Doncaster or Calais. We insure a lot of stock being stored around the world. The difference in this scenario is actually that to and that from was from where it was getting manufactured in Kent up to the distribution centre in Doncaster. Done. It's then being stored there indefinitely until it's drawn off and shipped to the final end customer and purchaser. That is the difference. It's not in that ordinary course of transit. It's specifically being sent there to be stored until being called off for sale. So we can bolt on that stock because it's still within that logistics model. It's still part of that kind of manufactured, transported, distribution center, outbound transit for sale. It's all can be neatly wrapped up together. Now, just to demystify a few things in respect of appetite and what information we need in marine, we are no different to our colleagues and peers in property. An address with a sum insured is not enough information to underwrite that, I'm afraid. We too want to know the construction, the security details, both physical security or what audible alarm security they've got. We want to know as much information as the property guys. We're not, just because we're in marine doesn't mean that we can just get away with underwriting something on a sum insured and an address, okay? But one thing we do often offer over and above the property market is more appetite for storage locations that are owned by third parties, such as hauliers and warehouse keepers. And also we have a lot more appetite because of our general scope of global cover that we provide from transit perspective to ensure facilities overseas. So that's where we can add some value. But going back to my first slide about Aviva, let's not forget business interruption is still required at these stock locations. So as much as it may only be an increased cost of working as opposed to a full gross profit need, you will need to consider that business interruption because we don't provide that as part of our indemnity in marine on stock throughputs. If it's sold and that can be proven, which, if you think about it, what you're talking about there is it's come off the racking, it's been put in the corner, it's sold, and perhaps then a fire occurred that night. Often stuff is unsold. It's in a warehouse, it's sat there, it's ready to be sold. But if on the rare occasion it can be proved that actually that was sold and ready to go, we will pay that invoice value. So obviously any profit in that sales margin will be picked up. But typically we will just be paying for the cost of that being replaced. So that business interruption risk is still there and does need to be considered alongside a commercial combined. And with Aviva, we can wrap that up all into one. So how does a marine cargo policy work alongside a traditional commercial combined package? Okay, well, let's first look at what's the property section, because that's ultimately what we're talking about here. It's property, isn't it? It's assets. It's a box of stuff. How does that provide cover? Well, very clearly, as you can see, and I've pinched this from an Aviva commercial combined property wording, it covers property, which is what we're after here, for damage, which is what we're after here. But the key bit there is it's got to be at a premises. It's got to be static. So, well, what about raw materials being delivered so they can manufacture or whatever it is? Or what about what they're importing in or what they're bringing in to then wholesale within the UK? Or what about what they're selling? How does that get to their customers? Well, of course, we've got a transit section we can offer, goods in transit, specifically own goods in transit. Well, let's have a look at that. Well, it's a cargo policy. Everything I said that on that slide earlier about what we cover, that's pretty much it, right? Isn't it? Property in transit, loading and unloading, temporary stored during transit, that is a cargo policy, okay? However, it does have one very common disadvantage, and that is, and here are all the exclusions when it comes to Aviva, but it's specifically exclusion 5A there, where damage occurs outside of the territorial limit, okay? And then that there is the territorial limit for Aviva's commercial combined. In essence, it's just the UK. So the moment you've got any customers that are importing stuff from Asia, or perhaps they've got a client base around the world, you know, the USA, how many products liability USA questionnaires have you done for customers that are distributing into the US market? Well, that's going to cover the liability of the goods, and for if something goes wrong over in the US, if it was to hurt or damage anything. But what about the container of that stuff being shipped over there? What about the physical asset itself in transit? What about the damage or loss to that? Okay, so in summary, transit under a commercial combined or any of these other products is typically just for UK cover. So where you've got a customer that's got a global reach, they will need to upgrade that to a full-blown cargo offering. Okay, so what sort of trades then are we talking about? Well, it's anyone that moves goods around, okay? But I'm not talking about them moving the goods, because that's haulage, and that's very, very different, because that's not their goods. So as I said at the start, they need a liability policy because they need to pay damages. What we're talking about here under a cargo policy is an indemnity policy. It's first party cover, so it's paying the insured for their goods. So let's have a think about some of the trades. Food. Food is a massive, massive sector for us. Production of food, importing of food, you know, it's a huge, huge sector. The common theme throughout all of these trade examples here is that the Harry Potter wand has not been invented, nor has teleportation. We wish it had, okay? But fundamentally, we are still in a traditional method of stuff being boxed, being palletized, being put in a lorry, put on a ship and moved. And when that is happening, there is a risk of loss or damage and a financial implication to your customer's balance sheet. And that is why this is a great risk transfer option to protect them. Clothing. We insure at Aviva many, many high street names for the production of their clothing, often done over in the Far East or Turkey. Then also the distribution once it hits the big warehouses out to the retail outlets. Clothing production is a massive, massive sector. General manufacturing, car parts, again, very as put in the picture there, but you know, manufacturing in general often requires parts being brought in, and then again, if they've got a global customer reach, you know, those finished goods, exactly what they're manufacturing being shipped out for sale. And again, we've got the actual production of food, but hospitality, often a sector that necessarily is forgotten, but ultimately those goods have got to arrive at those venues, those restaurants, you know, for them to produce the lovely plates of food as pictured there. I mean, just to give you some weird and wonderful examples, I've actually insured an insurance company where I worked previously. I worked for Allianz. I did the cargo policy for Allianz. It was only a very temporary policy, but it was the import of black boxes for motor vehicles. It was an internal purchase from Allianz Italy, the way in which they were sold. Allianz UK were responsible for them, and they were bringing in a lot of those black boxes, so they wanted an insurance policy for them. I've also insured a spa in the Midlands for importing of a wooden Thai temple, because they were renovating this spa and they were bringing in this old Thai temple as part of the new look of the spa from Thailand. So, you know, really, really vast ranging. As I say, ultimately, is something moving around? Is that then at risk of getting lost or damaged? If it's yes on all of those occasions, that is a risk, and we need to talk about that risk transfer. So in summary, why purchase it? Why talk about cargo? It's where the UK goods in transit is not going to be enough. It's where we're talking about trade, such as wholesale, retail, importing, exporting, all that sort of stuff. But the two bits we're going to explore more, and this is where people start getting a little bit confused with marine, and I'm talking more about the end customers because they're a bit naive to how things are covered. Using third parties and the compensation they will give is vital to understand and then realize the benefits of a cargo policy. And then lastly, it may not be a legal requirement. God, I wish it was. Sometimes I wish I wrote EL or motor insurance, because you've just got to have that. This is obviously a nice to have, but it is often a commercial requirement because of the way in which perhaps they've purchased the goods. So we're going to explore those two in a bit more detail. So using third parties. What I'm on about here is I'm a manufacturer. Okay, my skills, what I bring is the manufacturing of lovely desk tables, for example. Okay, everyone loves them. I'm selling them all around the world. I don't have a fleet of vehicles. I definitely don't own a ship. I definitely don't own a plane. My focus is the manufacturing of these lovely desk tables. That is common throughout many, many companies. Okay, so what they then do is they then use a freight forwarder, or they use a haulier to pick up their goods for them and deliver them. Well, in that scenario, it is very, very common that the person, the people, the company collecting those goods, they will limit their liability. So they're not trying to contract out of negligence, which you can't do, because if they lose or damage those goods, they're on for it. They've been negligent, they owe compensation. But what they can do is they can limit the liability as to how much compensation they give. Now, they're not being big bad meanies here, because ultimately, if you think about the concept of a lorry driver, they're thinking about the complexities of that lift and shift. They're thinking about how many guys they need to do the job, how many vehicles they need, how long's the journey. And if you get, by way of an example of that, if I had £1 million diamond in a box the size of a 50p piece, that is not a complex journey, taking that from here to Manchester. I can just chuck that in the glove box. So because it's not complex, I'm not going to charge a lot of money to move that. However, I'm carrying £1 million diamond. I may, on the other hand, get a phone call from a farmer to move their combine harvester 3 miles up the road, and that's worth 200 grand, so a fraction of the money. But actually, in that respect, I've got to plan the journey. I've got to have the right gear to get it onto the back of the lorry. I've got to think about how I secure it. I'm actually going to charge more money for that because that's a more complex movement. So as you can see there is no correlation between how much a haulier charges compared to the exposure, i.e. the value of the goods they're taking. So that's why they put these protections in place for them. Now, I've given you some examples there. The most common one is the Road Haulage Association. Many UK hauliers, and this is just for UK, many UK hauliers are members of them, a bit like we're members of the CII. And that allows you to use their standard T's and C's, use their contracts that have been through many solicitors, many lawyers. They've been approved, they're pucker. They just have to download that off the website, stick who their customer is and get them to sign it. Job done. That gives them protection, whereby if they were to damage some goods up to a ton, they would only have to pay £1,300. Now, I ask you, please, look around the room in front of you. Look at the most simplest thing. I've got my coffee cup in front of me here, okay? It's only worth pence, a pound, a couple of quid, okay? But you think about taking a ton of that, a ton of coffee cups. It's going to be worth more than 1,300 quid, isn't it? I can't think of many things where if you've got that pure volume of 1 ton of that item, that value then would be less than £1,300. So what is the result? Woodman Table Manufacturing will be out of pocket because I've entrusted that haulier to move my goods for me. Something's gone wrong. They've admitted something's gone wrong, but what I get paid back in a check is a fraction of actually the loss I've faced as a business. This is very, very risky stuff, and it needs to be understood because there are many, many businesses out there that haven't read the small print, aren't aware that this compensation level is in place. And it's often when something goes wrong, that's when they realize. And ultimately, a risk transfer can be offered here in the form of taking out a cargo insurance in their name, protecting their goods, where we will pay the full value of those goods, and then we will dust off the baseball bat and go and get what we can out of whoever was negligent. Now, the examples go on there. There's conventions that apply to sea freight, air freight, road haulage into Europe, which is called CMR, full-blown freight forwarding around the world. In summary, it's all very, very limited, no matter what way you look, okay? You do get scenarios where you could go to the haulier and say, actually, I'm not happy with £1,300 per tonne worth of coverage. Can you up that, please? And they go, yeah, sure. What about £5,000 a tonne? But suddenly the bill to move your goods has gone up, because they're not going to do that for free, are they? So actually, this can also then be a way of controlling those costs. And even though you might get a response of, oh, no, it's okay, we've negotiated up to the full value with the haulier. Well, my answer to that would be, well, get a quote for their standard cover and see how much that's going to cost you, save you over the course of the year. We then will get you a cargo policy. And actually, when you combine the two, you might be saving a fair bit of money here. So there's never no for an answer there. There's ways we can actually try and look at the costings, in fact, to see what is more financially viable. So just to hit that home a little bit more, I've got two examples here of pretty common stuff, an iPhone and a coffee machine. One very light, I've got my iPhone here, I'm throwing it up and down, it's as light as anything. And one that's maybe not so light, a coffee machine. As you can see, when you take the retail price of it, put that volume in place of either a kilo of it or a ton of it, there's nothing that gets anywhere near in respect of a recovery as to what's been lost. The nearest we get there is Warsaw, which is to do with air transportation, on a Nespresso, or 3 kilos, a ton of Nespresso Pixie machines. Now, I can assure you, even though 18 grand is obviously still very short of 46 grand's worth of retail value, I can assure you now, coffee machines are not getting air freighted. Air freight is for fast, time critical stuff. Coffee machines are going in a container on a ship for 6 weeks, trust me. So actually that's a bit falsified, but nonetheless, either way you look at it, your customer, the insured, is not going to get back the full value of what they've lost, and that is going to leave a hole in that balance sheet. The RHA actually only compensate where the total loss is above £10. And if you look, you've just lost £5,000 worth, a kilo of iPhones, and you wouldn't actually get any compensation, because on their calculations, their compensation would be £1.30. So you've got to have lost a fair amount of iPhones before you even get a tenner off of them. Really, really, really scary stuff. And let's not forget, negligence has to be proven here. So this is only at the point where you've proven that they've damaged that. You've proven they've lost it, and then you can get your compensation. That is then the most valuable and most costly to any business, time. Where if they've got a cargo policy, we will just pay them out the full value of those goods, and we will then go about trying to get that money. We will take that in that time to prove them negligent, to get a recovery agent involved and try and get some money back for us. Okay, so every way you look at it, using third parties is very, very risky. And I come onto it a bit. That would definitely be for me a trigger point, and one of my first questions is, who do you use? What are their terms and conditions? Okay, Incoterms. So now we're getting a little bit more technical here, because we're talking about importing and exporting. So probably not all of your customers, but I'm sure some. Incoterms were put in place by the International Chamber of Commerce, and you can find these within the terms of sale. Now, before we go into the depths of this, my offer to you, you don't need to know these ins and out, okay? There's 11 of them. We know them inside and out. So if you are talking to a customer and you're trying to understand whether or not there's risk there by exploring what terms of sale they buy and sell and import and export on, feel free to pick up the phone to me. We can talk through it, we can understand the risk, and that is a benefit we can provide here at Aviva. We will help you identify that there is or there isn't risk there, and then obviously we can support you in exploring cargo insurance with them. There, as I say, there's 11 of them overall. They're captured within the terms of sale. This is only to do with importing and exporting, because the International Chamber of Commerce wanted to bring ease and clarity over 3 things. Who's going to pay to get some goods from A to B? So you know, China to the UK. Who's going to be responsible for those goods during that transportation? And actually that responsibility, in accordance to the different Incoterms, will change depending on the point of the delivery or the journey, sorry. And then lastly, and out of 11, only 2 of them, and it makes our life a bit easier, or definitely you guys' life a bit easier, it actually specifies who needs to put insurance in place, but only on 2 of them. And actually they're not they're not the most common used ones. But we can try and explore the risk and then talk about insurance on the others. So as I say, 11 of them overall. What I've done here is I've pulled out and identified what I believe to be the most common ones. And in that terms of sale, in that document, they will often be acronymed into just 3 letters. So top one there, EXW, that stands for Ex Works. Now, if I may, I'm not going to focus on the cost of transportation, i.e. who's going to pay for what, because actually we don't care about that. We work in the world of risk, don't we? So I'm going to focus on the risk, i.e. who's responsible for loss or damage at what stage of the journey. And then ultimately what we offer, of course, is a risk transfer, an insurance policy, and then I'll highlight where then that conversation needs to be engaged. So let's start with Ex Works. Ex Works is like going and buying something from a supermarket. If you take your eggs and you take your milk and you put it in your boot and you get it out of shape round a roundabout driving back home, and you open the boot and it's all spilt and spoilt in the back, you can't go to Tesco's and say, can I have a fresh pint of milk and some new eggs, please? Because you bought those goods on essentially an Ex Works basis, i.e. the moment you walk out of there, the moment the transit begins, it's your responsibility. Okay, so in that scenario, applying the insurance method to it, if I'm a seller, if I'm a UK seller, and I'm selling all my goods on Ex Works, I'm exporting all on Ex Works, I've got no exposure there. I don't need any insurance. However, if I'm a UK purchaser and I'm buying goods from my Chinese supplier on an Ex Works basis, I take all the risk there. That's 6 weeks on the high seas alone, okay? So there really we are trying to find UK purchasers buying on Ex Works. That is probably the riskiest Incoterm they can buy under. Free on board. Free on board is only an Incoterm that's used where there is a sea transit, hence the phrase free on board, and it's free on board the vessel, FOB. In this scenario, the seller does take on a little bit more risk. And they say, do you know what? We will get the goods on board a vessel for you. So all that inland transit, so again, if you're a UK seller, leaving Sussex here, going all the way down to the port in Southampton, getting it on board the vessel, that's all my responsibility. So my buyer in the US doesn't have to worry about that element, okay? However, again, let's flip it on its head. I'm a UK purchaser, sat here in Horsham, and I'm buying goods from China on an FOB basis. Yes, the inland transits within China, getting it on the vessel in the port of Shanghai, don't have to worry about that. But arguably, I've still got the biggest part of that journey at my risk, the high seas, it docking in the UK, it doing all the inland transit to here in the UK. That's all my responsibility, okay? So FOB, seller, you've only really got to worry about that inland bit, and that ain't going to be covered on a UK GIT, by the way. They still need a cargo policy because that's an export, not a UK inland transit. So they still need FOB cargo insurance. But here, the key one we're looking out for is buying overseas on FOB. A lot of risk on the buyer there. Cost insurance and freight. So this is one of the 2 where we actually see the word insurance. So dead easy for us. We know some insurance has got put in place. The easiest cargo sale. However, so if I'm a UK seller and I'm selling, I need to provide insurance to the buyer of my goods. My risk is the same as free on board. So all I've got to do is get the goods on board the vessel down in Southampton. Anything that happens between there and then, my responsibility, I've got to fork out the cost to get that replaced and resent out. The moment it's on the high seas and en route to Australia, that's the buyer's problem. However, what I've put in place for them is a transferable insurance policy, which they can claim against. It's my cargo insurance I've bought, but I can transfer it to that buyer and they can seek the benefit of it. Okay. It's only to the port of destination. So it's only to Melbourne Port. The inland bit from there is their responsibility. Okay.
Ben,
But there's,
Ben,
yes.
just butting in, we've got a question. Port of destination being the port from where the goods are shipped? Presumably not. It could be whatever the name port of destination you've agreed in the contract, couldn't it?
Yes, so that's just that bit I just said there. So yeah, the port of, so with cost insurance and freight, the insurance element is only to the port of destination. So in that example I just gave there, it will cover it at the point the buyer is at risk, so freely on board the vessel. So the moment it sets sail from Southampton, all of that is covered until it gets to the port of destination, so Melbourne Port. So it's essentially only covering the high seas bit. The moment it gets unloaded at Melbourne, all the inland transit through Australia, that's not either my risk as the seller, you know, or am I providing insurance coverage for that? That's got to be picked up by the buyer.
That's cool.
Okay.
Yeah. I think that answered their question.
We were talking about selling there. The bit that worries me on this one is actually the UK purchaser. I'll explore it a little bit more in a second. UK purchaser, what they're doing here is they're buying their goods from the Far East, for example, and they're getting some insurance coverage there. So they're relying on the insurance put in place by the Chinese manufacturer. Okay, you guys, the insurance broker, they've trusted you on their commercial policy, their fleet policy. Why are they then turning you down to buy insurance from the Chinese manufacturer on a single shipment basis? That is absolutely where I'd be, you know, getting my teeth all into that, going, whoa, no, right. Change the way you buy those goods, buy it on Ex Works, buy it as cheap as you can, because the more the risk the seller takes, the more the price of those goods are going to go up. Buy it on as little risk that they're willing to give. Just get them to put it outside the front of the warehouse, and you know, and then it's your responsibility. We'll get you a cargo insurance through something I will place where I know exactly where that's going to be covered, who that's going to be covered with, and what cover they will provide, because I'm your insurance broker. You know, you trusted me with everything else. So that for me is the riskiest bit there, in that often it's like, oh no, I don't need cargo insurance because I just get it when I buy the goods from wherever I buy them from. That's possibly the phrase you will get given when trying to talk about that. Now, delivery duty paid, that is essentially the complete opposite to Ex Works. Here we're talking about your Amazon delivery. So here actually the seller is responsible to get the goods safely to your front door or wherever it is that they're being delivered to. Okay, so in that scenario, buyer, very little risk, seller, huge amount of risk. So hopefully that's given you a flavor there as to where you can start to explore through the terms of sale where the need for cargo insurance could lie. And as I say, there's 11 of these. If you want to speak to us, obtain it, understand what your customer is selling and buying under, and we will help you then understand where that risk is, and of course provide with the placement of cargo insurance. I think someone I've just on there, DAP, yep. Delivered at place. It's essentially the same, but there's just some difference in duty payment. But again, it's that Amazon delivery. You know, if you're buying on that, well then fair play to you. If you've managed to negotiate that, you've got very little risk. If you're selling on that, you've got a huge amount of risk. Okay, so typical cargo cover, exclusions and conditions. We're no different to any other line of business. You know, we can't cover everything. one of the things we can't cover, I'm afraid, is delay. We are a physical loss or damage provider. The goods need to have gone through a peril. If they're just late, I'm afraid that's just not something we can provide cover for. Because if you think back to that second slide, all those different modes of transport, delay occurs, all right? Stuck in traffic on the M25. It just is, it's verging on non-fortuitous. It occurs too often. You know, we as I say, that there's got to be a physical loss or damage to it. In respect to conditions, yeah, if you're using your own vehicles, we wouldn't apply this if you're using a third party. We expect you to maintain your vehicles, make sure they're okay, make sure the locks are okay on them. There's things like the cutting clause, which is where if you've got a massive big steel pipe, if actually that it's just the end bit that's been dented off a little bit, can we first attempt just to cut that off and neaten it up, and the rest of the pipe be okay? So as I say, we of course we can't provide cover for everything. These are just a few examples of some of those conditions and some of those exclusions. I'm more than happy to provide our policy wording as part of this, the presentation pack. If you've got any specific questions on certain elements of cover, I'd love to take up the opportunity to dive into those in a little bit more detail off this call. So the cover, okay, just a quick swig of my coffee. We are very fortunate in marine in that we all provide the same cover. The reason we do this is to give consistency for the cargo owners. You know, this dates back centuries, and we provide cover under some wordings, is probably the easier way to call them. They're technically called clauses. Some wordings that were set in place by the International Underwriting Association, and within that, a subcommittee called the Joint Cargo Committee. And they're called the Institute Cargo Clauses. As I say, they're wordings fundamentally, they're not clauses. Often we see clauses, you know, as a separate thing in a schedule. They're the fundamental wording. There's 3 of them. Talking about that witchcraft and wizardry and understanding of marine, we've tried to really help you guys by calling them A, B, and C. That's really helpful, isn't it? Well, let me tell you, A is all risks, so that covers everything. B, we're starting to just name those perils there. C, we're not only naming the perils, but it's really limited. Donning a phrase from the property market, we're talking about like flea cover here, you know, very, very limited. 99.9% of the stuff is always going to be under all risks. Standard quotes you'll see coming out of most composites here in the UK, we're providing A clauses. So the difference between Aviva and NMU and RSA and all of that, right? There's none. We provide the same cover, Institute Cargo Clause A. It's all risk cover. So we're very fortunate that we don't tend to have to battle over, well, they provide better cover than you, blah, blah, blah. Fundamentally, if you want the basic cover that will be majority of the losses, we're all providing the same thing because it's all the same base wording. And you get certain ones that are tailored for people dealing with frozen and chilled products or commodities like oil and gas and what have you. But, you know, of course, we do want to try and have a bit of one-upmanship on our competitors. So what we might do is we might take maybe an exclusion that's standard and rewrite that back in, or we might want to take something that's limited and up that limit. And we actually might want to provide stuff that is silent, like debris removal, or we can provide things like a brand or a trademark protection. If actually your customer feels that despite the fact that those garments could be washed and cleaned and put back out into sale, their brand, their trademark means more than the items themselves, and they'd hate to risk one of those items maybe not being perfect. So, you know, there could be some protection there. You know, sheets and ropes, the simplest things, as the actual stowage material, providing some cover for that over and above the actual products themselves. It goes on and it goes on. And of course, the ones at the bottom there, storage, that's that stock throughput. We can bolt that on. That's not standard cover under the clauses, but we can bolt that on. We give other things like exhibitions, trade fairs, that, you know, going to shows in the UK or around the world, but also little things like samples and equipment for sales guys and girls going around in their cars. You know, we can provide all that sort of stuff as well. Okay. Just trying to think here, again, one of the aims here is like how we can build this into other commercial covers. Products liability, you know, I mentioned that at the start. Complex referral to underwriting because they're buying stuff from Asia, so there's no right of recourse, and they're selling stuff out to the US, a highly litigious country. Okay, that's great. That's all to do with the liability of if that product was to injure or damage someone. But what about it moving? What about it actually being shipped around those territories? Let's think about cargo cover. Business interruption when specifically stating overseas suppliers or customers. Well, yes, again, that provides the interruption for if something was to happen at their premises. But what about then the goods moving from said premises to or from the UK? Business travel, again, if they're going out to see these foreign clients or foreign suppliers, that's surely to set up said trade route and then assets to move within that trade route. Fleet, if they've got a fleet of vans, yes, that's going to give the cover for the vehicles and the liability and everything that's needed for that. But what about what's inside the vans? Okay, so some ideas there. Now, this is the bit I've been saying throughout that I'll come on to, because this is, I feel, hopefully the slide that will give you what you need to help give that confidence and trade cargo insurance, in that it gives some of the common kind of objections that you might receive. So you've done the hard bit, you've spotted the opportunity, you've understood their Incoterms, you've been told that they're using a third party to move the goods around. Here and then some of the things you might get back. One is, so we'll start with the I'm not responsible for the goods or the insurance. That's that Incoterms bit, the one that's top right on the screen there. Well, actually, just double check that. Get their terms of sale, double check it, give me a call, make sure they're absolutely correct on that. But when they say they don't, they might, again, this is where you're probably going to get, yeah, but I buy it every time. I buy on CIF. Well, okay. Again, for me, that's an easy conversation of, well, why do you trust me with your fleet insurance and your standard commercial combined insurance, but not that? Why are you buying that out of China from the people you're buying the goods from? That's the first challenge back from that, I'd probably say. But then I'd say, well, get me a copy of it. Who's the insurer? What's the cover that's provided under it? Because to meet that Incoterm, to say, yes, we've put insurance in place for you and we've meet the objectives, we've meet what's set out in that Incoterm, they only need to buy flea cover. You saw that on that slide back here, right? You know, it's next to nothing. But they've met the requirements of that Incoterm. It's not all risks. So again, I'd explore that. I'd probe that a bit more. That then bottom left there is, well, if they damage it, they can pay for it. This goes back to that risk of using a third party. God, you know, there's no wrong in thinking that. Anyone would think that. Well, if Eddie Stobart's just come and collect it and deliver it for me, if something goes wrong, they can bloody pay for it. That's not. It doesn't. When you say that out loud, of course you'd think that, but actually no. Read the T's and C's. You're not going to get all your money back. So they have to be negligent. There's time limitations. There's financial compensation limits. Again, get the T's and C's from them. Explore it. Let's find that risk. And then the top left one, that is where actually they're potentially buying the insurance facultatively on a single trip basis through the freight forwarder. So through the company that is organizing all that transport for them. We provide the cover to the freight forwarder. We provide them essentially a bit like a delegated underwriting authority. It's on a shipper's interest policy, or sometimes called an open cargo policy. Again, guys, this goes back to, you know, buying insurance from the supplier in China. They're entrusting you with everything else, but they want to buy their insurance from a lorry driver for their cargo. Push that. Say, well, what cover are they getting? How much are you paying for it? Why are you not using me for that? It's unregulated. There's no advice. It's very, very risky. Speak to them about getting their own cargo insurance on an annual basis that will provide them the protection they need, and they won't need to buy it every single time. We, of course, have claims. That's what we're here for. So to give you a bit of an example of some of the claims we see, you've got your most basic perils, such as the goods have been stolen or there's been a fire. You know, lorry fires are more common than you think. bad maintenance of brakes or hydraulic cables, that sort of stuff can have fires. Road traffic accidents, again, very, very common. You've then got the weird and wonderful perils of the sea. And I mean, obviously we can all think about what can happen on the high sea. The vessel can sink. They can throw the goods overboard. It's called jettison if they feel the vessel is at risk. But also, there are legal matters such as general average. I'm sure we all saw what happened in the Suez Canal and what happened with the Ever Given there. There's a bill that every single cargo owner on board that vessel will be receiving to have got that vessel up and running again. And if they haven't got cargo insurance, which will pay for that, that's going to land on their desk to settle. And then, other stuff, missing parcel, non-delivery. It's a material damage policy, right? So you can probably think about what could happen to a box of stuff. So that leaves 5 or so minutes for questions. I hope that's been of use. I hope that's given you an idea of where to spot the risks, where to have those conversations, the types of, the way in which that can be transferred via a cargo policy, and then some of the perils that your customers might face. So yeah, thank you very much for your time.
Excellent. We've got some questions, I think.
Sure,
some of these you might have answered.
I'll keep sharing because I might want to dive back to a slide if I feel like there's something on there.
So we mentioned about how does it differ from DAP or DDP?
Yeah, delivered at place, yeah.
And CIF the same as DDP. I think you picked up on that.
So as I say, with CIF, so firstly, delivered at place, that sort of thing, that is an Incoterm that can be used for multiple modes of transport. So it can be road haulage from here over into Europe or whatever. CIF is very much a term that is predominantly used for sea freight. And as I say, that's the one where we start talking about insurance, and I've got multiple worries on that. One, how much are they paying for that insurance every single time? What's the cover? Who's the underwriter? There's so much that can be explored there. One of our competitors, NMU, they will do this presentation and they will very much focus on cargo insurance being a way of controlling costs. And what they mean by that is that if I'm a supplier of goods and we are negotiating those terms of sale and those Incoterms, if I'm taking on no responsibility whatsoever, i.e. Ex Works, and I'm saying, there they are, I'll put them outside the front of this warehouse, you come and collect them, you pay for the transport, you're at risk, I'm going to sell that for a lot cheaper, aren't I, than if I'm doing it at the opposite end of the scale as delivered at place, or delivery duty paid, where I'm taking on a lot more risk there. I'm taking on the cost of transportation. I'm taking on the risk of loss or damage. I'm sorting out the duty for you. I've got to insure it. That's going to be a lot more expensive than buying it on a CIF. Now, on Ex Works. So by at least the risk bit, stripping that bit out, taking the risk on every single purchase you make, or every single sale you do, or whatever, you can control that cost a lot better, because you can just get a cargo insurance and put the cost by that.
If there is a delay and they're temperature controlled goods, would the policy respond there is damage? I think it's because on one slide it referred to about the extensions about frozen, because presumably you can cover that as an extension.
Yeah, so if the proximate cause of the loss was delay, then we wouldn't pay. As I say, there has to be a physical loss or damage. So if actually the proximate cause was the journey was slightly late, which is common, but the refrigerated machinery broke down, that's the proximate cause. The goods deteriorated because the machinery broke down. The fact it was late had nothing to do with it. It was because there was a fault in the machinery that was keeping it, the refrigerated machinery. So you don't often get it, just because there has to be we often pay those claims, but delay actually wasn't the reason for the loss, because it was typically because they got left outside where they should have been in ambient conditions, or as I say, the machinery broke down that was keeping the fridge going. There's normally a peril involved, but the key thing about delay is that there has to be a peril. If something is just late and it's like, oh, this is late, I'm going to claim for this, I want some money for it being late, that's not something we will pick up.
Okay. Can you expand on the BI cover available a bit more?
We don't provide BI cover.
There you go. Okay, I'm just asking the questions as they're coming up. Somebody's put here, fantastic presentation, very well explained. Can you share the slides for us to reference?
Absolutely.
Yes,
yeah.
They will be sent out hopefully later today. Actually, I'm going to send them out to everybody afterwards. Is CIF always clause C?
And don't do CEC.
Say again, sorry?
Say that again.
Someone just said something there.
Oh no, all right, no, that's all right.
Okay.
The question was, is CIF always clause C?
So just to be clear on Incoterms, it's actually something that us in the insurance side of things have no control over. That is to do with the buyer and the seller, and whatever end of that spectrum your customer is, that's their business negotiation. And yes, those sorts of things can be changed as part of that business negotiation. But the thing that worries me is that to meet it as standard. So if it isn't known that it's C clauses, and I'm a tiny little SME, only just started to find a cheaper production route through Asia, and I just get the terms and conditions through and I just sign it because I'm so excited to start expanding my business. I have no idea what Institute Cargo Clause C means or anything like that, and I've just naively accepted limited cover as part of the insurance. So I cannot emphasize enough, what I'm giving here is a broad overview and spectrum of 4 of 11 Incoterms. The biggest thing I can offer as part of this presentation will occur after it, and that is understand, you have the chat with the customer, your client, understand their buying and selling, understand the Incoterms they're using, and then set up a call with me and we can go through it and we can really dive. I'd rather tailor it to that customer because they can be negotiated, and so we need to understand it specifically for that customer before we then start talking about whether or not there's risk, and then ultimately whether or not there's a risk transfer.
Yeah, I think
but out the box, if you were going to be a supplier and you were going to offer CIF to purely meet, so i.e. if it got to a court and they said, yeah, it was put in place, you only need to provide C clauses.
Which is why that's why you have put in the presentation it's limited, but technically it can be A or B or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. So we provide all risk cover, right? That's our standard cover. So if we had a policy holder that was selling on CIF, what they'd be giving away is their policy, which is all risk. So in that scenario, yeah. But as I say, put yourself in to the best example I've got is a family-run business. They're starting to expand. They've just negotiated these new terms with a supplier in the Far East, and they've just completely they've not even looked and seen that. Yeah, okay, right, we're buying it on CIF, blah blah blah. Little do they know, actually, that supplier has just done the bare minimum to meet that requirement, and they're just giving them C clauses.
Okay.
Fleet cover.
Is it possible to provide a crib sheet with all of the Incoterms?
We can't, so they're copyrighted. We've had what we've put on the screen there. We've that's in our own format. It's dead easy. Just Google Incoterms. Just Google Incoterms, and the latest versions are 2020. They're online. There's if I could do it now, I'd show you very, very quickly. They provide them. They're out there.
Okay. We've got another question as well. What about temperature control goods packed wrongly by a third-party warehouse? Does that
Packing
depend?
done by third parties we wouldn't hold, that wouldn't deter us paying the claim. That'd be unfair, right?
Yep.
Because they had no control over that packing.
Because they were responsible from the point. Yeah.
Yeah, if the insured packed it and it wasn't done right, then possibly. Now, we sit behind a desk. We don't know. We deal with multiple different commodities. We don't know how these goods should be packed or how they shouldn't. So what we do is we would utilize a specialist. So we would utilize a marine surveyor that is knowledgeable in that certain commodity type, such as pharmaceuticals or food shipments, and they would go and assess it for us. And if they report it back to say, look, mangoes are typically shipped in this way, that is the guidance that's told to do it, but your policyholder has not done it like that, and actually that's what's led to the loss, then ultimately, there's got to be some sort of contributory negligence there and some sort of responsibility borne by the insured that they weren't doing it in the right way. So it was obvious. It was, we go back to futurity. It was obvious then that they were going to deteriorate because, you didn't even put them in a refrigerated container as an extreme example.
Yep. Sorry, all these questions are in chat. So can
That's
you
fine.
explain a bit more about what a sum insured in transit should be declared in the context of production cost only versus goods that have been pre-sold, and so some element of profit is included?
Yes, that is an excellent question. Right, bear with me because there's a few bits I'd like to talk about that, if that's okay.
Yep.
So firstly, let's talk about the way in which we provide indemnity and our basis of valuation. That's how we declare it on the schedule. Okay. If it's in the UK, then we provide and we state this, and you'll see this in any Aviva cargo schedule. If it's in the UK, goods they're selling to UK purchasers is the invoice price. Okay. So that then, of course, will include their margin and their profit because it's what they're selling it for. If they are buying purchases, it would then be the cost to which they paid for that, the replacement. So if they're selling, if it's sold goods within the UK, it's invoice cost to them. So what they've sold them for. So it will include, because I think someone said a little bit about profit, will include that element of profit. Okay. Importing, exporting is different because in there we've got to think about other things such as the cost of freight and what have you. So in that, it is not the Incoterm. So this is where it can get a little bit confusing. We have an Incoterm called cost, insurance and freight, but actually we provide a basis of valuation for importing and exporting, also called cost, insurance and freight. The cost is the cost of replacement. So if that cost of replacement is that you provided with an invoice as to how much you paid for it, then we'll of course pay in accordance to that invoice. If that cost is a sales invoice as to how much you've sold it for, we'll of course indemnify you in respect to the money you owed back from that sale. So that's what that cost of cost means. We'll also then pick up the freight costs, which at the moment has gone through the roof. So we're seeing much bigger claims down to the fact that the freight, well, there's a bit of background noise from.
Yeah, that's fine.
That we're seeing actually increased claims because the freight element alone is getting more expensive. By extreme examples, it used to be £1,000 to ship a container. Now it's £5,000 to ship a container. So we're actually seeing bigger claims as a result of that. We also then give, and this is only for importing and exporting, we also then give a nominal amount over and above everything, typically plus 10%. So we will overvalue it by 10% just to allow for any other costs that may have occurred, fluctuations, and that goes back to centuries ago in that when goods were bought and sold, actually when they were out on the high seas, the value might have changed. So it's a bit like an index linking type thing. That's the nearest I can probably put it to. But we literally just up the value by 10%, no questions asked. Okay, so that's that base evaluation. In respect of sitting down and reviewing those annual values with your clients, this is just an extra bit I wanted to talk about on that question is, please don't forget those other types of transportation that may not necessarily be a sale and a purchase. Intercompany movements, moving it from the distribution center to the retail outlet, where there's no sale or purchase at all there. It's just purely an internal movement from warehouse to shop. Returned goods. Is it on a sale and return? Is it on a trial? Are they receiving stuff back under warranty, whereby they're actually taking the responsibility for that? Please don't just focus on what you're buying, what you're selling. And by using turnover, if I had £1 for every single time I had a submission in, and it was just based on their turnover, well, their turnover, right, is their sales. So that's going to be their most expensive. That's the highest cut price those goods are ever going to be, what they've sold them for. Well, break that down. Actually, find out how much they're importing in on a purchase of raw materials. Split that from the sales, because ultimately that's going to lower that value. If I just put a rate to just the turnover, the premium is going to be higher. If I put a rate to the purchase and then a rate to the, that's going to make for a much more competitive premium. So a few bits on that, sorry.
No, that's excellent. We've got, are there any goods? I've got two. So I'm going to wrap three questions up, if that's all right. Any goods you will not cover? Will you write a farmer distribution business, all temperature controlled, but does not have to be? They do it purely to keep the quality, and they only do over-the-counter drugs. And is blockchain coming soon for marine insurance?
Yeah, right. I'll quickly close off blockchain. Well above my pay grade. I'm trying to learn about it. We'd I've been to a few lectures on it. I'm still a bit puzzled by it, and that's just me being truthful.
I'd never heard of it.
Yeah. So what we face a lot of risk in insurance, cargo insurance, sorry, specifically, in that I couldn't tell you where any of our stuff is right now. It could be anywhere. We could have a massive accumulation right now at Shanghai port and know nothing about it. So that is potentially one of the things blockchain will bring a benefit to us, where we can start to understand it. I won't comment on blockchain, if I may. It's a bit above my head. But I can see, I think it will come, yes, and I think it will bring some benefits. The pharmaceutical risk, love it, love pharmaceuticals. Okay, I'd need to explore that with you a little bit more, because the way we write pharmaceutical cover under the Institute food clauses, i.e. it gives that bit of deterioration cover, but sometimes that pays out only where there's machinery breakdown of the refrigerated equipment. So with pharmaceuticals, sometimes there's no refrigerated equipment. They're put in a box with ice packs around them and stuff like that. So pharmaceutical risk, absolutely. We will need to just speak about that specifically and how they ship their goods. And then I've forgotten the first one. Sorry.
By the way, great presentation. Thank you. And excuse all the questions from Sentio. They've asked quite a few.
Oh, that's good, yeah.
Food clauses, okay, for the pharmaceutical one that you've just answered.
Yeah.
So thank you for that. Any goods you will not cover?
So I will make a promise right here on this presentation, in that if Aviva have got appetite for it on a commercial compliance perspective, you shouldn't be getting a no out of the cargo team. We of course have group boundaries that we can't go over, and some of those are pretty common. Some of those are quite unique to Aviva. I'll give you the two examples. Weapons, okay, that's pretty common. Most people won't write that. We can't write that. At Aviva, we've got a slightly more specific one, in that we as a group don't get involved in tobacco manufacturing and production. The reason be it is that it's been decided that gives a bit of a counter conflict to our life department. I won't give opinion on that, but so we can't get involved in the shipment of raw tobacco and to do with tobacco manufacturing. We insure some of the UK's leading supermarkets and the movement of their goods. Of course, some of that is often going to be booze and fags. So we can pick it up when it's actually a packet of cigarettes, but to do with the production of cigarettes, that's quite unique to Aviva. We don't go anywhere near that. But no, do you know what? You know, run of the mill stuff. We've even got a fine art and species team, yeah, in London that does we insure vaults of all sorts of stuff. So no, our appetite is really quite expanding.
Can I just ask one other quick question, because
Yeah.
I'm conscious of time, but so beside the marine cargo, which and thank you, Ben, this has been real eye opener, I'm sure. I think it's been really excellent. So
you.
within Aviva, you can also write the pleasure craft and all of that within
You
your
can't.
team.
Oh no, I'll be
Oh.
very sorry. I'll be very clear on that. Sorry. Yeah. So we can write the. We just do cargo and freight. Sorry. Yeah, I probably should have been clear of that. That was just an overview of what the market looked like.
Right.
We got involved in that years ago, but we've decided to step away from that.
So you don't do any
just,
hull now.
No hull. Marine hull. That is not Aviva's cup of tea, I'm afraid. We write cargo. So we write what's on board some of these vessels, and we write the operators that are operating the freight forwarding and the haulage for their liability. But no, it's physical cargo assets or liability for shippers. That's all we offer.
That's cool. That's fine. I just wanted to ask that because I thought it might
no, good clarity. Thank you. Yeah. So when you put our details on wherever it needs to be, just cargo and freight, I'm afraid, not hull.
That's fine. Do you include subsidiaries? I have a shipment from Netherlands going to UK, brought by UK parent, but also delivered direct to ROI subsidiary in the subsidiary name. Would this be okay in the event of a claim? So there's mixture of
so in that scenario, that it sounds like that person's got a bit of knowledge on that and it's been explored already. We would need to then look at who's got the title of the goods, and by the sounds of it, it's the Republic of Ireland that's got the title of goods. So the claim would come out of the Republic of Ireland, which of course is Europe and an EU risk. Aviva, foresight of Brexit, we partnered with our Dublin office. So we've got a delegated or underwriting authority from Dublin where we can still offer freedom of service cover via Dublin. EU subsidiaries, we can write those really easily. USA, we can do that pretty well. We're not a Zurich, we're not an Allianz. I'll be straight up, and Aviva don't have offices all around the world, and we would need to partner, and it's a little bit more complex. But we can offer full global programs, and we've got them, where actually we're not only just picking up the UK parent company, because it's got to be led by a UK parent company. We're also picking up the US local company. I spoke about clothing, right? We've got a lot of clothing manufacture, we've got a lot of clothing production, and a lot of these clothing manufacturers are selling in the US and around the world, and we can do that full global program, absolutely. Excellent. We do just need a little bit more time on those, because the way in which we've got to put that local cover in place, that's not, I'll be straight up, that's not something I can turn around in 24 hours. We need a couple of weeks on that, because we need to do some reinsurance and all of that. So, yeah.
Excellent. Has anybody got any more questions? Because I'm conscious it's we're sort of 20 minutes over.
That's fine.
But which is great, because we've had some really good. Somebody said here, tax is not the same, is it?
No, not at all. No, not at all. So we will guide you on that. We've got expert internal teams, so when we're talking about tax here, we're not talking obviously about the taxation of their purchases and VAT and all that. We're talking about insurance, premium tax. Depending on where it is around the world, it's not all 12%. And if we're having to put that local cover in place via a local policy or via freedom of service, we would then calculate that as an individual premium, and we would charge local taxation on that individual premium, and we can facilitate the payment of that for them, same as we do UK IPT.
Excellent. Well, hopefully, has anybody got any more questions? If not, we'll finish the sessions, but I will share Ben's.
Thank you. It's nice to have questions, because it means people are listening. It's nothing worse than ending the presentation, no one's got any questions, because it's like, well, so brilliant. Thank you.
Yeah, and I will be sharing Ben's contact details as well with
Yeah.
the presentation. So if any of you've got any questions, you want any more clarity, you just want some support in getting over the message to your clients and why they need to buy marine cargo, then just ask Ben. He'll be more than happy to support and help you.
Very much so. I'd much rather, as I say, this was as much as an overview I can do in an hour or 20 minutes. But I'd rather speak specific about a customer and their trading terms, and that is the bit I really enjoy. So bring forth particular risks and we can work with you on them. And that is because we appreciate that a cargo inquiry or a potential cargo element might pass your desk 1 in 10, where a fleet's every day, and, you know, stuff like that. So we understand that it is a bit infrequent. So that's why we've got to be here as the experts, where we're doing it all the time to be able to help you.
Excellent. Any questions, guys?
Quick, close it there. Lovely.
Excellent. Thank you very much, everybody. I'll stop recording. And thank you very much.